Greetings from LEORON Channel Studio. We're very happy to air a new episode today with another new topic. The title this time is Global IFRS Implementation and Challenges. I am Drena and I will be hosting the show together with Nicola.
Hello from my side as well, and thank you for being with us today. We're welcoming Philip Todorovski, the head of Finance and Accounting Business Unit in LEORON Institute, and specialized financial trainer, Mr. Mike Turner.
They will share with us their experience while providing more information on global IFRS implementation and challenges. Let us engage our first guest for today. Philip, it's our pleasure to welcome you in our show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure likewise.
Philip, you have been with LEORON Institute for over 7 years now, currently as head of the Corporate Finance Business Unit. Let's start with, first of all, defining IFRS. What actually are these standards and what is their main goal?
Right. So basically, let's just define what IFRS stands for. These are the International Financial Reporting Standards, which are a set of accounting rules that are used by companies to make and intend them comparable across the globe. So these standards are actually issued by the International Accounting Standards Board and are updated on annual level. Currently, around the globe, there are around 166 countries where the IFRS is within jurisdiction. So IFRS is becoming very popular across the globe because it brings three things: transparency, accountability, and of course, economic efficiency to companies and countries across the globe.
Philip, changing to IFRS standards does not come without cost and effort. What do you think are the main challenges in implementing these standards?
Definitely IFRS has a lot of challenges that companies are facing. And some of them are the lack of education and training that the professionals are usually receiving within their companies. And besides that, also the support, the executive level support is needed for that implementation to be done in the right way. On a larger scale though, there are many other challenges that countries are facing. However, where the quality of governance of institutions is very high, adoption of IFRS is very less attractive. According to one study, it was found that cultural, political, and business environment terms continue to impose significant obstacles to the IFRS implementation. So all in all, there are many challenges that IFRS do face in terms of implementation itself. However, they're also addressed. Mm-hmm. So there are solutions and there are measures that companies and individuals can take in order to ease the process. I have to say that these challenges are even greater in emerging and developing economies across the globe.
And how do you think that COVID has impacted IFRS implementation across the globe?
Right. That's a good question. Basically, COVID has impacted our lives in many areas. And that's the professional, the private, the social part, as well as including the financial markets. And not only the financial markets, but the bonds, the stocks, and the commodity markets like crude oil, as well as gold. So in this pandemic, there's a high uncertainty of the companies, and that usually leads to companies cut their costs, and usually the first thing that comes up is the training budgets that they actually allocate to train their staff. And as we know, training and education is paramount, it's critical and has a huge impact in the IFRS implementation. Not for the implementation itself, but actually for the support of the implementation and making sure the process is successful at the end of the day. There was a panel discussion back in 2020 by the International Accounting Standards Board. And there was also a poll that was done for the attendees there in terms of IFRS reporting challenges. So these challenges, by the way, just to clarify, are for companies that already have implemented the IFRS. So the panel discussion found that there are many professionals that actually facing challenges with the reporting of the IFRS 9, which is the financial instruments, and the IFRS 16, which concerns the leasing part. And these questions, these challenges are not surprising because this is something that companies are really experiencing.
Recent studies show that one of the main challenges in implementing IFRS is a lack of education and training. In your experience coordinating LEORON's IFRS training with different companies, do you find this that is the case?
Absolutely. I would say absolutely. Even from my experience, as well as there are many studies on this topic in terms of training and education of the professionals. And this is of a great importance because we as a training institute, our aim is first of all to educate and then to train professionals, increase their competence level, at the same time also provide the tools and the processes of how this implementation should come in place. So all in all, there's a need for higher education, and this is especially I'll come back to the emerging and developing countries because usually this is the issue in those economies. In the GCC region, in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, this has been taken very seriously, and companies are spending and always allocating budgets for training and education because they realize there's no other way how to increase the competence level as well as the professionalism in their companies. So yeah, in this way, we as a training institute will help companies in that cause in the training and development sector.
This initiates my next question. What is the best way or method to learn the IFRS principles and standards? Interactive sessions, group discussions, case studies, and practice, or maybe the theoretical approach?
Right. So basically, learning or getting educated and getting new knowledge of the IFRS, it's not a one-stop shop. It's not something that we can do at the very same moment and then we're done with it. So we need to take learning and knowledge is an ongoing process, which means the standards themselves are quite live. They're not like they're published once and that's it. There are amendments, there are interpretations, and there are a new set of rules that come up on annual basis. So that's why professionals need to push themselves and also try to learn and be active in terms of getting the updates as well as taking training courses or seminars or webinars, whatever it makes them feel that they're more equipped in terms of getting the knowledge. So for a professional that has no knowledge of IFRS, we really need to take a holistic approach. And what does that mean? We cannot provide them a training course that's filled with theory, let's say, and we expect for them to be well prepared and well versed for the IFRS implementation. Rather, we need to take a holistic approach where we'll provide the fundamentals, which is the theory part, and then engage them into the real life and case study application, which we highly encourage. And that's how our candidates and our delegates on our programs actually experience with. So the real life, the real case studies are critical in the actual understanding of the IFRS. So coming back to that holistic approach, once we combine everything and we use all methods and tools, then we can expect and have a better understanding as well as supporting the implementation of the IFRS. And the interaction part, discussions come up from that. We cannot expect to have discussion and interaction where we provide only theory, right? So we need to keep the sessions alive. We need to really provide the live case studies that are done in order to prepare them for for their company situation or any situation that they're facing while the IFRS implementation is going.
Philip, what kind of IFRS courses we offer in our portfolio in order to support organizations in the implementation and knowledge accumulation?
Right. So in our institute, we have designed few programs that tackle and deal with the IFRS standards. I would start with the most comprehensive one, which is the certificate in IFRS. And that course basically covers most of the important IFRS standards in depth. And it's quite an advanced program, actually intermediate towards advanced program for professionals that already have a foundational knowledge or are already familiar with the IFRS standards. So this course intends to provide the challenges as well as the impact of the IFRS and going in depth, covering, for example, IFRS 9, IFRS 15, IFRS 16, which are one of the most important IFRS standards that companies are dealing with. However, going more in depth, we have two separate programs that actually deal with IFRS 9, which is the financial instruments, and this is very important for banks mainly, and IFRS 17. And IFRS 17 is one of the newer standards. It's concerning insurance contracts. So these two courses tend to go in depth of the IFRS standard itself, because those standards are quite complex, and we need to spend more time going over the details as well as the actual implementation part. So overall, besides the already designed courses that are in a way fixed, the outline it's more or less fixed, we also provide another option, which is the in-house training option. And this is an option that companies use in order to make a customized training according to their specific needs. So our team working in instructional design usually takes the requirements from the client and designs a program that's specifically tackling the requirements and the issues that that company is dealing with. So in this way, we can focus on IFRS 15, we can focus on IFRS 9, or even maybe create a basic program on IFRS for participants or professionals that have no knowledge in this area. So our institute basically provides an all-around approach in terms of educating and providing support for professionals, not only in the GCC, but basically across the globe, since we have implemented the live virtual online trainings from 2020.
Philip, thank you very much for your answers. I believe we have Mike on the line. Mike, hello. Can you hear us?
Hello. Yes, good morning there.
Greetings to you. Let's continue on this topic by focusing on the first question for you.
Mike, you are an expert facilitator specializing in IFRS and over 20 years of work experience ranging from the Big Four accounting firms to various public and private entities. Having all this on mind, why does Saudi need to adopt to IFRS?
That's a great question. I remember one of my teachers years ago, there was this joke we have. He said, what's 1 + 1? Well, if you ask an engineer, it's 2. If you ask an accountant, it's what do you want it to be? So the problem with accounting is there are many different ways to interpret the numbers. And as we go to a global economy, it's very important that investors are able to look at numbers and compare them with different investments around the globe. One of my first assignments back in the 90s when I worked in Romania at Deloitte was to take those financial numbers and explain them to Americans. Because back in the 90s in Romania, we used to take foreign exchange losses and call them an asset, which doesn't make any sense to someone outside. So the reason why IFRS really needs to be used in the GCC region in Saudi Arabia is as we go to a more global economy and as money flows to and from, we need to make sure that we are able to prepare results in a way, in a language that everybody understands what those numbers mean. And that's why it's really important.
Philip mentioned earlier, what are the biggest challenges in adopting the IFRS standards in our region here? That's
a very good question. I think the standards of adopting them in the GCC region is no different than the US. There's basically two broad approaches around the world as to how we've done account in the past. The Americans have always based account on a bunch of rules. And the problem with these rules is you always find accountants and lawyers to find ways around the rules. And IFRS has basically taken a different approach more that we used in the UK, which is saying, instead of having an elaborate rule book, let's have a concept. And the concept is we want the financial statements, the numbers, to show reality. So the biggest challenge, and to me it was no different with Saudi Arabia or the United States, is anybody that grew up with a US accounting background, we call it US GAAP, their mindset was more follow the rules. Well, Enron, which is one of the largest oil companies in the United States in the late 90s, was basically an accounting scandal. Because what they did is they looked at the rules and they say, how can we apply the rules to make ourselves look good? But there was no reality behind them. So I think the biggest challenge is to change the mindset. We want to show the reality. In the United States, Americans didn't like IFRS in the beginning because they said, Mike, I want to be able to look at the rule and to get the answer. I always remember years ago, I was doing some work in the Asia Pacific region. And I was working with someone who actually was a former employee of the US Securities and Exchange Commission. And we were talking about Enron, and he actually worked on Enron. And he said to me, Mike, at the SEC, he was a very senior person, we did everything correct. We followed the rules. I said, hold on. You followed the rules of one of the biggest scams in American history. How can you feel proud that you did a good job? So the problem is, if the rules lead to a set of financial numbers that don't make any sense, it has no value. So the biggest challenge for me when I work with people in Saudi Arabia or in Dubai or even in the United States is to change the mindset. It's not rules, it's we want to show what is the economic reality. And it's a total mindset change. And it requires a lot of work and a lot of training and a lot of discussions and a lot of analysis. It's not easy. The hardest people for me to work with are those 50-year-olds who've been doing this for a long time because they've been doing it the wrong way for so many years, and to get them to change. The younger people were much easier to work with, but the challenge there is they don't have the experience base, so they tend to grasp too much of the theory, and they try to memorize theoretical aspects and not be very practical.
Mike, we mentioned earlier that one of the biggest challenges in transitioning to IFRS is lack of education and training, which leads to copying the actions of other reporting entities. Why would you say that this is a good practice, and why so?
Copying is a bad practice because the problem is IFRS is trying to show the reality. So if we take, for example, Aramco, they have a very different reality than, say, Exxon, or a very different reality than McDonald's. So what we're trying to do is not to get people to copy, but to actually a lot more critical analysis to show the reality. So the problem is, in a lot of environments, you find that people that are inexperienced are not sure. They simply get someone else's financial statements, Control-C, Control-V. I always remember when I was doing this in Africa, one of the banks, they copied the financial statement explanations and notes. And in the notes, they actually had the name of the wrong bank because they copy and paste it. So that's actually the worst thing to do because we're trying to get the financial statements to understand our specific circumstances. And it's a high skill. It's not an easy skill. So copying leads to problematic financial reporting. And the only way to overcome that is practice and practice and practice. And when I work with people in Saudi Arabia, in Dubai, in Kuwait, what we do is we go through case studies and we say, look, what's wrong with this? Hold on, what's the reality here? And to get people to try and think, because everybody's always in a rush. I want to finish the financial statements. I want to submit them. And they don't take time to look at them critically. That's the biggest challenge.
Mike, you have a long track record delivering tailor-made training solutions for companies around the globe. And during the last 5 years in the GCC region, have you noticed any differences in the challenges when it comes to different countries, or is the same everywhere?
No, there are a lot of differences. I find that in some educational backgrounds, there's a lot more creative thinking and analysis, and in other educational backgrounds, there's more memorization. So one of the challenges that I find is that IFRS really requires people to understand the reality, understand the process. I remember one of my very first jobs was a chicken farm. And I thought a chicken farm is easy. And I remember looking at some invoices, this is back in the 90s in South Africa, some chicken eggs. And they purchased these chicken eggs from America. This was in South Africa. And the eggs, I don't remember exactly, but they were expensive, like say $50. I said, well, hold on. Why would an egg be so expensive? This must be a fraud. Well, actually, those eggs were purchased from the United States because that was their breeding stock. And those chickens basically had baby chickens that got fat with a little bit of food. That's food conversion. And a good accountant is all about understanding how all those costs translate out into a kilogram of meat. So the hardest thing is a good accountant who's good in IFRS really needs to understand what is the business, how does it work, so we can make sure we report the financial reality. And so for those countries where there's a strong critical thinking part of the education, it's a lot easier. And in those countries that are more memorization type approach and more, where students aren't as creative, it's a little bit more challenging. So that's what I've observed.
Do you think that technology advancement and education technology, meaning on the virtual training, have helped in reducing the impact that COVID-19 has had on the global scale?
Personally, I find the virtual training is very challenging because virtual training is great for new people to get the basic skills across. But when you get into the more advanced concepts, you need that face-to-face interaction where you go through situation after situation after situation. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach. I think virtual training is great for that first stab, the basic competency for the newer people or to expose them to what the IFRS standards are. But if you don't also couple that with interactive case studies, going through situations, and the problem with virtual training, it's very difficult to get people engaged in discussions. The best times that I can educate and get people to be very proficient in IFRS is when you have a group of people with different industries and they all debate and talk about it, and I facilitate that discussion. And that's best achieved when you have your live classes. So I think the virtual training is a great way for us to offer more training, more cost effective to a wider audience, but we need to make sure we still keep those interactive case studies. I think it's better when they're in person because the discussions are a lot more effective. And I think that's one area. What I'm very good at is I challenge people's critical thinking. And I think when you do the training, the problem is you get a lot of times, if you look at budget and price, you say, this is cheap, let's go with this. And oftentimes that's a younger trainer, which is doing a good job, but they have things, they know the slide pack, here are the rules. When you get the more experienced people like myself, I don't really teach the rules. I say, you guys can read the rules on your own. I expect them when they come into my courses to know most of the rules. And I go through some of them or some of this because there's some new standards. But I say, okay, how do we apply that? And I think where you make a difference is that critical thinking. And it's hard to do critical thinking virtually. The critical thinking really is with the live, face-to-face, challenging people's way of thinking, those short, and if you don't do these short bursts of sessions, it's not like you can go sit away and I'm going to master IFRS for a month. I do a lot of work with CFOs and senior finance members, and they come away and you spend time getting them to think outside the box. Maybe if you work for a phone company, you talk about examples with the fast food and you try and relate it. And you also go back, obviously, to phone company examples. So I think the virtual thing has changed it, but I think we've realized that we need to have this more blended approach. There's a role for virtual, there's a role for live, you got to stick them all together. If you just pick one of them, it's probably not very effective. If you just pick live sessions, it's too expensive. You want people, before I have someone come to my class, I want them to know the basics. Why should I tell them, here are the 5 rules? No, they should have already seen that. I want to now talk about how we apply them and get them some interesting discussion points.
Mike, in association with LEORON, you delivered IFRS training programs with many companies, including SABIC. You designed the IFRS conversation training material for SABIC, which was delivered to over a few hundred of their finance staff. That's amazing. Can you tell us a few words about that experience?
Yeah, that was a great experience because actually my first trip to Saudi Arabia was in 2005. And when I went to Saudi Arabia in 2005, it was a different mindset. There was a lot of reliance on expatriates, and the locals were not very involved, is what I observed back in 2005. More recently, in 2016, 17, the more recent years, I found what was really good is a lot of young people have been educated, had the critical thinking, were actually involved. And it wasn't simply, let's just get some outside consultant to solve our problem. They were able to solve it themselves. So it was nice to see a country evolve where the young people were able to actually take a leading role and make things happen. It was a great experience.
So when teaching IFRS to these massive organizations, do you focus mostly on technical knowledge? What is the best approach in learning how to successfully transition to IFRS, especially in times of disruption?
The only way, in my opinion, is with case studies. So technical knowledge is, I expect the people that are more senior to be able to read a bunch of rules and be able to know what the rules say. Where they struggle with is what does that really mean? And so what I always focus on is not, well, it is technical, but it's the case studies, it's the analysis. So you take a situation and say, what does it really mean? For example, one of the new concepts in the mobile phone industry, at least in Europe, is where you have cell towers, they're very expensive. So instead of having one cell tower, let's say for Vodafone, and another cell tower for, Etisalat, what you would do is take one cell tower, at the top of those towers, you would put different antennas. So the phone companies came together and said, well, let's just cut half of our towers and we'll share them, but we'll have our own stuff in the top. Now, from an accounting point of view, how are you going to deal with this? Because Vodafone has some towers that are theirs and then someone else uses the top, and other companies have towers that are theirs and Vodafone puts them on the top of theirs. Well, whose assets are those? Are those shared assets? You have half of all of them. Looking at the standards of the concepts. So you take real case studies of real scenarios and you basically dissect them. You say, what does it, from an accounting point of view, what does it mean going back to those concepts and principles? And this is quite tough. It's quite tough. And the problem is these case studies, it's hard to find a good book of case studies. Most of these case studies come with people that have been around for a while, have a lot of experience, because they solve them with different IFRS implementation projects. So to me, it's all about going through complex case studies that require you to interject your technical knowledge to bring to a conclusion and helping people think. When the people that I work with, one of the comments I would say to me, Mike, what you're helping me do is how to analyze it with an IFRS mindset. I can't teach you I don't want to teach you just to get the correct answer. I teach you the process to get the correct answer. Because even as IFRS experts, we can sometimes have different conclusions. So the most important thing that we as experts can give you is, what is that thought process? I've had a number of situations where some of my clients have different audit firms. There's the big four audit firms. I have two different audit firms, and both audit firms have a different opinion. So if I focus on the correct answer and two audit firms have different opinions, that's not going to be very successful. So what I need to focus you on is, what is the thought process? How do we develop our arguments and how do we develop our conclusions so we can apply it consistently within our organization so we have high quality IFRS financial statements?
Philip and Mike, thank you for being part of our show today. It was a great pleasure to have you in Learn TV.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us. You can tune in for viewing more live stream on LinkedIn or recorded sessions on our YouTube channel.
If there's anything you deem important but we haven't managed to cover, just drop us a message and we will review it with our team. Until next time, stay tuned.